recording. Jules, wonderful to see you. Thanks very much. You just got in from work as well, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I use work in the looser sense of the word. I've come in from my legal practice, for those that don't know, as well as being a DJ. I run my own kind of specialist music legal practice to look after not just dance music, but a lot of it is dance music for obvious reasons. So just come in there, taking my lawyer's hat off, putting my DJ's hat on, and here we go.
Just a question, I meant to ask this before. Do you still enjoy that? Do you enjoy that? You seem to, when I've spoken to you before about that the legal side of things, that still...
Oh, very much so. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to enjoy it, but, you know, when you're an artist, I've spent 30 plus years as an artist, and your whole focus really is on yourself. And it's quite, you know, it rebalances you to suddenly take what you've learned, but not focus on yourself at all, totally focus on the careers of others. And, you know, what I provide goes a lot further than your standard music lawyer who's not kind of lived it and breathed it. I really have. And, you know, I very much enjoy, I'm very passionate about doing it on behalf of others, because, you know, to be successful as an artist, you've got to be a bit selfish and a bit kind of tunnel visioned, if you like. And it's really quite good for the soul, dare I say it, to go away and totally flip that on its head and apply that self same kind of obsession on behalf of others.
Right, good to know, and some tips in there, no matter already. So look, you're doing this for Club Chill Records, really appreciate it. The label launches really, just launched in June. It launches with the Marshall, Jefferson and Jungle Ones track, 24th of July, which I know you've had listened to. Good tracks, something for Chicago feel. I think I sent them to you because I knew you'd appreciate them, Jules, so that's all very good. But look, tracks of the unexpected, and I've got to give you a huge thanks because I've got a bunch of guys doing these over the next few months, and the idea kind of ignited from the time you came up to Centreforce Radio for the interview that we did. And I don't know why I was surprised, because it came was unexpectedly. You played London Calling as you're signing off records, you see, and it always stuck with me, you know. So playing a bit of Clash just seemed fantastic, but unexpected. So that triggered something in me. So what have you got for us tonight? We've got 5 tracks from your record collection that people wouldn't perhaps expect, and a favourite chilled track. So what's your first track, please, Jules? What we got and why?
So my first track is Cars by Gary Newman. And it's funny, one of the few advantages of getting a bit older is you get to look at music and how certain artists have been treated kindly, and indeed genres have been treated kindly and unkindly by history. And when Gary Newman came along, I was pretty young. I was at school, and he seemed a bit weird, and he was very commercially successful when I was a young kid. So I kind of was a bit turned off the music he made, even though if you listen to it objectively, it was incredibly ahead of its time, incredibly ripe for being sampled, influential, those really big synths, very catchy hooks. All his records went to #1, but maybe the fact they went to #1 slightly put me off because it made it seem a little bit naff and a little bit commercial. But, you know, with the benefit of the passage of 30 years or thereabouts, I think history has been very kind to Gary Newman. I think he was a visionary, very ahead of his time, and this is well deserved to be played as my first track.
I love that, fantastic. Was that a track that would have been played at discos that we would have gone to around that time? You know, when discos had the different tribes all doing their different 15 minutes type thing?
Wow, that's funny. Do you know what? I became a DJ very young when I was sort of 15 or 16. And I probably became a DJ because I hated the discos that were around so much that I felt it was only suitable to go away and create my own market. So I didn't do much sort of groping to a slow dance. I kind of created my own market.
Wonderful. Okay, so Cars, Gary Newman, thanks very much. What's the second unexpected track, please?
Well, the second track's probably the most dancey of all the ones I'm going to suggest. And I guess it is therefore not quite as unexpected as the others. But what I love about this record, it's Trapped by Colonel Abrahams, and it's been sampled a lot as a record. But what I loved was that the fact that every Colonel Abrahams single, because of course we're going back to the vinyl era, and he was signed to a major label, he was signed to MCA Records, so he had the full artwork package. Every one of his 12-inch singles came not just in a regular sleeve, came with a photo of him. And he'd always be dressed up in this really camp military uniform, which I found really, really funny. Whether it was a kind of, you know, he was showing his kind of real kind of I don't know, village people side, or whether it was just meant to be a bit ironic, I don't know. But for that reason alone, I've got to choose this record. And of course, it was a hit of its time. It's been sampled left, right, and centre. He's got a really distinctive kind of voice in that kind of CC Rogers type vein. So yeah, let's go for that one.
Wonderful stuff. Now, where would you have heard a track like that, Jules? Because when did that come out? 86 maybe, that sort of time?
Well, around that time I was going to New York a lot, just at the end of the era of the Paradise Garage when I was very, very young, and before you needed to be 21 to get into the clubs in New York. In fact, they changed the age a bit later than that. So it was from that era. I wouldn't necessarily say it's my favourite record from that era, although I love it. But there's a lot of great records that kind of came, that were then what we would at the time have called garage records, that are not really what you describe as garage records now, which were those slightly slower, sort of 115 to 120 BPM records with quite kind of soulful vocals that had a bit of that kind of Latino house in them, had a bit of early house, and then had, in the case of that record anyway, a proper major label behind it, the kind of marketing force for a major record label.
Yeah, okay. And just out of interest, a 16-year-old Judge Jules, where would you have been going buying records, buying those 12 inches? Where did you go?
Well, I suppose it was Soho. There were various records in Soho. There was kind of Trax Records. There was City Sounds in Holborn. And I went to New York a lot to buy records, even from very young, because there were certain tracks you couldn't really get over here at the time. It took a while. It took between the sort of mid through to the late 80s for the infrastructure of getting every record you wanted to get really quickly, especially those American style bootlegs, to arrive in the UK. A lot of them you really had to do lump over on a student travel fare to New York. I remember it was cheaper. BA flew from Gatwick and Heathrow, and the Gatwick flight was a really unpopular choice because it stopped in Manchester before it went over to New York. So you get it dirt cheap, like 150 quid return. And of course, that's what I did, going to buy records very regularly. Right,
yeah, that sounds like it was a really exciting time, and just going to New York around that period, but also just picking up records that no one had, or very few people, you know. Right, so the next track then, please. Where's track number 3?
So the next track's a really weird one. If it didn't have such a sort of strong personal association, I'd probably really hate this record. It's by William Pitt, and it's called City Lights, and it's a kind of really 80s sounding kind of Euro record. But for me, I've only had 3 or 4 DJ residencies that I think were most responsible for me having a career, if you like, as a DJ. Okay. And the first one I had was beyond putting on my own events, which I used to do back in the day, the raves that I used to put on. But the first proper residency I had, where somebody else took the chance and booked me, and I did it for 3 and a bit years, was a thing called Club MFI at Legends in Old Burlington Street, which went from 1988 to 91, so right through the Acid House era. Yeah. And this was the record that we played end of night. And do you know what? At first, I think I probably played it at first because the promoter, who I was just so grateful to for giving me this first gig, said he really loved it. And at first I didn't really like it, but you know, sometimes you've got to play the game. But once you've heard something for 3 years at the last record of the night, people going mad in arguably one of the best periods of clubbing in history in London, it really sort of melts into your soul.
I love that idea. Talking about this sort of, I guess, the Balearic connection as well. Are you missing having the opportunity to get out there at the moment, out in the sun and so forth?
Well, I'm going to Ibiza actually this weekend, but I doubt I'll be DJing there this summer. Very annoyingly, had gigs in Ibiza and Mallorca. Had started losing from early season as well this year. Had them in May, and there was one night when I was due to be playing in Ibiza and Mallorca on the same day for the first time ever doing both islands. Right. So I think it's an interesting one. In Spain, they have much more regional government, regionally devolved governments. So local regional governments can make much more choice and have much more autonomy over the way they run their little regions than in this country. And there, basically, the national government, as part of the coronavirus de-escalation, said, well, clubs can open, but they have to be at 30 or 50% capacity. That was the national government's position. But the Balearic government overruled that because it was something they had jurisdiction over, and they said, no, clubs can't open in 2020, which is a crying shame. The Spanish government, it was a bit more complicated than that. The Spanish government also said you can open with 30 or 50% capacity, but you can't have anybody dancing. So you had to put like tables and chairs on the dance floor. Of course, people would have danced. So it's a real shame. I mean, it's going to be an interesting one to observe because the Balearic government have got a slightly fractious relationship with the clubs in that it's government out of Palma, and obviously for Mallorca, the clubbing market is sort of important, but it's just one of a range of things one can do as a tourist. But they have jurisdiction over Ibiza, where of course clubbing is so big a part of what's going on. Now some of the venues can stay, the outdoor ones can. So I think Ocean Beach will be open this forthcoming summer, or O Beach as it's now called. Maybe some of the other venues, but it's going to be a weird year, that's for sure.
It's absolutely. I mean, it's a very shared experience as well. You know, all you guys are out working and so forth. But I also know you're coming to Maidstone, I think, in August or September for the revival thing, where people can take their cars. You know, so it's trying to be creative, isn't it? You know, and push things forward. So there's an opportunity. You will be playing out then in England.
I will be. Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one. Car rave, plot of land around your car. You can dance with the people you're allowed to dance with and not intermingle. I don't know. There's so much one can say about the whole virus thing. I mean, it's particularly hard on younger people who will go out and hang out with one another, whether we like it or not. And there's been a lot of illegal raves for kind of different reasons to the illegal raves that I was involved in when I was in my sort of teens and early 20s. And it's really easy to be dismissive and say, you know, they're playing Russian roulette with the older people's lives. But the reality is, it's all very well us being a bit older trying to preach to them. But I think if I was 18, I'd be doing the same thing. So I'm a bit cautious about being over preachy on this subject.
Yeah, and that's understandable. When that thing come through about the Maidstone Moat Park thing, it actually brought to mind some of the old meeting points we used to go to back in sort of 89, 90, you know, where cars would be on Blackheath, you know, and all the doors would be open and people would literally be dancing on car roofs, you know, in little groups. But it is very, very different. But good luck with that, you know what I mean? See how it goes. People are just trying to do things, aren't they? Jules, what's the track number 4, please?
Okay, so the next one is Barry White, it's Ecstasy When You Lay Down Next to Me, which is another tune that comes, I suppose I only became aware of in the sort of Balearic era of the late 80s and early 90s. I knew Barry White. Yeah, Barry White's got this really distinctive baritone voice that is, you hear him sing once and you'll immediately know it's him. But this thing's got this amazing groove, and I think the fact it references ecstasy in the title made the DJs at the time throw it on because it just seemed so relevant. But it hasn't aged. It's got kind of throbbing, relentless bass line, very hypnotic bass line, and it's got those kind of strings that all Barry White's records from that era had, very distinctive strings. So it's a lush piece of music that's very danceable. It's quite long as well. It's a bit of a, you know, it's not one of those ones that's a 7-inch edit. Whether it was ever, in fact, even released as, I've got a 12-inch of it, but whether it was released predominantly as a single before, I don't know. But it's just got all the right bits. It's got mood, it's got strings, it's got those deep. I dream of having a deep Barry White style voice. I'm afraid I'm the sort of antithesis of that. Yeah, what a tune.
Out of interest, are you a fan of much of his wider work as well, Barry White stuff?
Love Unlimited Orchestra, I quite like. That was his orchestra, and they put out some albums in their own right without so much Barry White. It was very much in his style, but just more room to breathe. I mean, some of the stuff can, you know, even by the standards of the music of the late 70s and early 80s, is a little bit too, you know, hey baby, I want to take your panties down. You know, it just doesn't sound relevant at all. So it's a bit much for me. But that one particular tune sort of resonates as well in 2020 as it did back then.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Tearing off tights with your teeth, that is more relevance, I think, to our generation, you know. So, okay. And track number 5 then, Jules. What's the track number 5?
So the track number 5 is Edie Brickell, What I Am, which has been sampled on a few hip-hop records. There's a lot of acts I like that kind of straddle genres. You can't really say what Edie Brickell is genre-wise. I guess she's a folk artist, but then the beats to the record are very sort of hip-hoppy.
Okay.
And it's got really sort of freaky, sort of folky, hippie type lyrics. So for me, if you on those rare occasions where you can combine a groove, that just a head nodding groove, to a vocalist with a really distinctive voice that's not easily pigeonholable, to a great song with kind of out there lyrics, I mean, you're onto a winner.
And where did that track come onto your radar out of interest?
I seem to remember, like in the early 90s, there was a bootleg version of it where people beefed up the bottom end, added a bit of a breakbeat, and away you went. And it was funny because I didn't know the record at all then. I was sort of, as is the case when you break into DJing quite young, I kind of knew that I had the tunnel visioned knowledge of the music that I grew up to. But there were a lot of artists that were quite household. You know, acts like Fleetwood Mac or Led Zeppelin or all those sort of acts. I just didn't know them at all. Right. So I remember getting that bootleg and playing it once in a club back in the day, and everybody seemed to know it except for me, which is a bit embarrassing.
Fantastic. Okay, and when we do these tracks of the unexpected, kind of link it very strongly to the whole idea of the Club Chill Records thing. A favourite chilled track? If you had to pinpoint a chilled track, please, Jules.
Okay, so I've gone to Ibiza for many, many, many years, and spanning back to the time when you couldn't actually get a scheduled flight to Ibiza. It's as weird as it sounds. You've only been able to go direct and scheduled and not on a charter flight to Ibiza for 20 years. Before that, you couldn't. You had to go via Madrid or Barcelona, and even before I had my own residency in Ibiza from 2000, I was going to Ibiza every week, but having to kind of shuffle through Barcelona or Madrid, probably no sleep on a morning after the night before. And I'd get onto Iberia planes, and for some reason, Spanish airlines love to have music. They love to have background music. If you get on BA or EasyJet or Ryanair, dare I say it, you don't hear music. You don't hear music being played. Or Ryanair, they just try and sell you scratch cards. But for whatever reason, on Spanish planes, they have to have music, which I kind of like. And they used to play this one record that just is ingrained in my head. That for years, I could sing it to everybody, but I couldn't get anybody to identify it for me.
Okay.
Probably because trying to sing when you've got a really crap voice anyway, what a flamenco guitar sounds like, it's not very easy. So eventually, really recently, actually, only about 3 months ago, I found out what this record's called. I mean, I know every line. It's got castanets, it's got warring Spanish guitar. It may be something that people know, but I never knew what it was. And so it's by Paco de Lucia. It's called Entre dos Aguas, which means between two waters. It's a really well-known piece if you happen to be Spanish, but not a very well-known piece if you're some mug like me trying to sing it to people and getting them to understand what the hell it was you were inquiring about.
Wonderful, Jules. Thanks ever so much. I hope you enjoyed talking about the tracks. I just thought this sort of thing's very insightful for you. People see you up there doing what you do, and I'm always curious about what's in the record collection that people wouldn't expect, you know. So, and I said it did come for when you was on the station and you played London Calling. I just wasn't expecting it, you know. I guess it had the football reference for you as well, did it, at the time? But by playing the Clash track that time.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I'm missing football and trying to work out what I think about football without crowds. I haven't formulated an opinion yet. Too early to say.
Jules, thank you ever much for that. Really, really appreciate it. Lovely speech to you. Good luck for the rest of the summer, and hopefully catch you up very soon. All right. But thanks for taking the time. Thank you very much. Take care. All right. Cheers. Many thanks. Bye bye now. Bye.